Okay, hello. I had to make a little video. I just had a talk with my new friend, Farsad. He works at Futurist in Finland, and he talks a lot about state charts. And generally, he's just, as he writes here, he's passionate about UI engineering, and he tries to explore different concepts, how they can combine, and like, should we even write code? Maybe we should visualize it more. It's really inspiring to talk to him. And he just did a podcast. I can share it in the notes. You should really listen to that. Anyways, I showed Farsad something I had been working on, because it's this. We have this library called XState by David. I don't remember his last name, which is really, really cool. And David is also really awesome at talking about XState and state machines and state charts. But for me, I haven't gotten to the point where I can see how I can use it. I see like it can handle super complex stuff and you get lots of benefits with it. But I'm so used to using state management libraries like Overmind, for example, which I work on myself, or MobX or Redux or whatever. And those solutions has worked really well for me, and I just can't see how XState could replace them. But still, I see how XState solves some complexities in a really good way. So I thought, okay, I had this experiment I showed Farsad, then I got inspired to iterate on it, because I really want to expose people using Overmind to state machines, but I want to do it in a way that's more comfortable than learning the XState API. I want them to be able to use it and rely on this simplicity. Like, I'm biased. I've been developing Overmind, but I think the API is very straightforward. And there's a lot of APIs in XState that gives it a lot of power, but you don't necessarily need it to solve most common cases in a web application. I don't know. That's my theory. Anyways, let's get going. Let me show you this thing. So I created like a machine. So this would be like something you would add to Overmind. Maybe it should be part of the project itself, because it's just a type and it's an effect. So let's look at this. I want to define a state machine of lights. It should be green or it should be red. And then to transition between these states, I want to name a transition called switch. So we switch between green and red. And now TypeScript starts yelling at me, because this is also really important for Overmind. It's to have a kick-ass typing experience. And I think I've actually achieved that, at least with simple state machines. So anyways, TypeScript tells me to insert the current state, and that should be green. And then we have to define our states. So let's see here. Let's take the green first. As you can see, we get type help. It also knows now that I need a transition, and you don't have to implement all transitions on all the states. You only have to choose one or however many you want. And it knows that, okay, now we need to transition to a different state. So let's transition to red. And then when we are on red and switch, we want to go to green. Cool. TypeScript is happy. We have our state machine. Now the question is, how do we transition it? And how do we manage things like actions and services, as they're called in XState? Well, in Overmind, you already have actions and you have effects, which is basically services. But then the question becomes like, how should you express these transitions and handle them? And this is where I got a light bulb moment after playing around with this some more, after talking to Farsad. A way I think this could work is that, because in XState you define everything inside the machine, while in Overmind you split up your state from your logic. But I think I found a way this can be kind of cool. So what you should do whenever you work with a state machine is to create a switch statement. And then you point to effects, transition, and you point to your state machine. And now TypeScript actually understands this, that you're pointing to a state machine. So it tells you what kind of transitions can you make here. And we want to do a switch. And then when we create our case, we want to handle the green state. And we want to do something related to that. Break. And then we want to handle the red state. I want to do something, break. And then we have the default, which is nothing. So the thing here is that when you do this transition, it will return the new state if there is a new state. Meaning that like this one will always return either green or red. But if you were, for example, doing something else and you didn't want to treat the state if it's the same, like because then you would just do it over and over again. You can just you fall into the default. That's what I mean. So for example, if you were doing an HTTP request and you went into the loading state, like you would say load here. I want to load, but you're already loading. Then you would fall into the default instead of getting into the loading case, which to me seems like a way to much better handle these different states. And then if you wanted to make a new request again, you could even down here, like going crazy with switches, but you could say state lights current, and then you switch on the actual state of the machine, and you would say like, okay, if it's loading, do the request again, or something like that. Like this is just an experiment, but I have this feeling in my stomach I'm onto something at least. Because now what we have achieved now is to very easily define state machines. And what I realized is like in XState you have these parallel state machines and stuff, but we don't really need that in Overmind because you have this overall state and you use the machines inside this state. So parallel would just be, okay, something else, some other machine. And you also have stuff like nested machines. But here I'm also thinking that you would rather nest them here. So you would transition a different machine here. They don't have to be explicitly put into each other. You just want some way to express that they relate to each other. So anyways, just some thoughts. Yeah, and then you have access to firing other actions, changing other state, transitioning other machines. You can do whatever you want here. The important thing is to define a state machine and then to safely transition it, like isolating the transition so that you act upon the new states, if any, correctly. I hope this made some sense. At least this is just something I wanted to share, and hopefully it made sense, and I'll work some more on this, and maybe it will be part of the next Overmind release. Who knows? Though I completely forgot to show you some of the most awesome stuff here. So, okay, we have our machine here. We're not actually acting up on these transitions. We're just running the transition. But let's move into... Can't believe I forgot that. Let's move into our component. We point to our lights and we point to the current state. Now it says green. We have our action here. When we click it, it flips the state because our action transitions the state, but we don't really act upon those transitions. But the really cool thing is if I bring up the Cerebral Dev tool here, oh, I'm debugging some stuff, we can actually see that we have our machine here. We can see the definition of it, what its current state is, what states it has. But more interestingly, in the actions overview, we can see that we are actually toggling the machine. So here we are transitioning. We pass in the state machine and the kind of transition, and it tells us what it returns. And then we can even see that it actually does change to the current state of the lights. So with Overmind, using these state machines, you also get a lot of insight into when they run, what they transition to, and all that stuff. So yeah, I completely forgot that, but here it is.